welcome to When Women Preach. This podcast exists to empower AAPI and Latina women faith leaders. My name is Diana Shing, and I'm here with co-founder and executive director of Isaac Younglee Hertig. And our guest for today is Cris Otonari. Cris Otonari is a Bay Area native and has 2 grown boys. She loves food and the outdoors. She's a full-time adult discipleship director at Menlo Church and is currently in the Master's of Theology and Ministry program with an Asian American ministry concentration at Fuller Theological Seminary. She is a participant in our PastoraLab program and will also be facilitating a new cohort for the Bay Area soon. So Cris, we love that we have you today as our guest. It's amazing that you're the adult discipleship director at Menlo Church, since I personally don't see that many women in discipleship positions at church. So we'd love to hear more about your role there. What are your specific responsibilities? And what was your journey like to prepare you for that role and give you that desire to be a director of discipleship?
Yeah, thank you, Diana. And thank you so much for having me. So for the first part of your question, I am responsible for recruiting leaders and for new groups, for maintaining and launching new groups, recruiting coaches to care for those leaders, and connecting people to those groups. I do a lot of matchmaking. I also oversee care ministry, which includes recruitment for and shepherding of the prayer team, as well as general pastoral care of the congregation. And some other things that aren't really directly in my job description, but I do include the sacraments of communion and baptism, facilitating funerals and weddings. And I run programs, for lack of a better word. So programs like evangelism programs like Alpha, and short-term groups like book clubs and labs where people can gather in community. And then occasionally I teach and preach. So it's a wide range of things, but my role basically involves anything that touches on the care and spiritual formation of adults.
Wow.
That's a mouthful.
Cris, that sounds like a minimum 5-person job, and it doesn't surprise me. Asian American women and women in general are worker bees of institutions. Whoa.
Yeah, that is
I
amazing.
think it's reflective of, ministry. We all usually wear multiple hats, and then a broad thing like discipleship, which I think a lot of churches don't even like to use that term, can encompass so many things. Like you could really throw in connections and different things in there. So.
Can I suggest one thing? Sometimes it's okay to play dumb.
You're right. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. Or just like no is a single sentence.
I have no clue how to do that. Kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's hard. And also because a lot of things I want to do and they're good for my growth. So
and you were so good at it. I'm super excited about adding another role for you to your overflowing plate. And feeling a little bit guilty, but I've never had this kind of a competition. Cris, in organizing another new Bay Area PastoraLab Cohort, Cris said, I'll be praying about it. And I told her, let's see whose prayer is more powerful.
The Young was competing even with our life, so.
And I won.
Wow, it's amazing. Thank you for saying yes to that. Well, how long have you been in the role? How many years has it been?
So at Menlo specifically, I've been in the role about 5.5 years. But yeah, I was going to talk a little bit about my journey to get here. And so for the second part of your question, I became a Christian much later in life. So I was 37. I already had kids. And I became a Christian in a group that was similar to Alpha. And what we frequently did and still do in groups like Alpha is immediately after coming out as a participant, we turn around and start serving in that ministry. And that's what I did. And so at that church, once you start serving, you get put into a ministry-based small group. So I got put in a small group with other people who were serving in the same ministry area. And then I've pretty much been a part of small groups ever since.
Wow.
And when I went to my second church, I got involved in their women's Bible studies. I always kind of vowed to myself that I wouldn't get involved in women's ministry. And that's exactly what I did. So I participated in the women's Bible studies, then I led a group, and then I became a shepherd of other women leaders, joined the women's leadership team, and then eventually got the attention of staff and joined staff on the discipleship team. And so my role was initially to kind of manage the whole system of discipleship, like the pathway, to kind of move people along the pathway. And then eventually it kind of morphed into caring for and managing all of the life groups as well. So I've kind of always been part of discipleship and groups since the beginning.
I don't think this was a set of questions Diana prepared, but as I heard all of your tasks, you are doing pastor's responsibilities. And so in promoting gender equality and equity at the pulpit, have you thought of getting ordained?
I have thought of it, yes. And been told that it's you have to be called by your church, of course, and was told by leadership that they would call me to ordination. But I've been dragging my feet. And still wondering what that path would be like. But you're correct in that a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis is really the role of a pastor. And you're right, I think there's value and a lasting legacy for women who become ordained. Because
it's interesting that you said you've been dragging, and so I have been nudging women towards ordination. I myself, I had to be seated, by Presbyterian Center Director long time ago at Fuller. She said, because you're a woman and woman of color teaching at a seminary, first thing, you need to get ordained. So I said, yes, I will. And I did. So I'm passing that on.
Yes. Thank you. I feel the nudge.
Well, that's actually a great segue to the next question about your journey and your identity. And so I quoted you, but you said you're third and fourth generation Japanese American, and you shared this quote, recovering from a life of whiteness as you have been intensely reclaiming your Japanese heritage over the past 4 years, fully embracing your whole identity as a Japanese American daughter of God, and contextualizing your ministry through an AAPI lens. So we'd love to hear more about that journey of identity and how that truth has impacted your ministry.
Yeah, I would say that the catalytic event that started the whole journey was George Floyd's murder. I think it shocked the world, and it was a wake-up call for the world and the church. And then as our church started to take small steps toward racial reconciliation and kind of understanding some of the structural racism that was happening, I found myself having this kind of growing frustration and grief.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of it was learning my own, like looking at myself and realizing my own racist tendencies and the things I was brought up with, my own biases. And part of it was feeling like I didn't fit into the conversation anywhere. Because what I found was that most of the conversations were around a black-white binary.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, I don't really fit into either of those categories. So I think it was the beginning of really starting to feel and understand what it feels like to be a perpetual foreigner in my own country. And that's when I started taking Asian American classes. And then that really helped prepare me with language and understanding and knowledge about like xenophobia and microaggressions, the harmful implications of the model minority myth, liminality, and a lot more. And so I realized in this journey that I had experienced much racism in my own life. And I remembered things like this time in elementary school where these boys threw food at me and told me to go back to Japan on Pearl Harbor Day.
Wow.
Yeah. And so the hard part was I think I had stuffed so much of that down, as did my family when they returned from the concentration camps during World War II. And so I didn't even realize that I had really denied so much of my heritage and also kind of stuffed some of the grief and pain down. And, kind of part of that is a little bit cultural because that's what we Japanese people do. We don't talk about things openly and talk about our trauma and pain. So I think I started to feel the grief and a little bit of shame for kind of denying my heritage. And then I started to feel more this tension between these two worlds that I live in. So kind of the individualistic Western world that kind of shaped my life and my faith, and then my family heritage, the traditions and history. And I do think that there's a fear, in particular in the white dominant evangelical world, of kind of embracing those parts of your history and your heritage and tradition, because like we might be called a pluralist or, even a heretic. And there's a fear of kind of turning your back on your faith. So these are all the things that I was dealing with and kind of in tension with. And so I decided to just kind of dive head in, to experiencing and learning about Asian and Eastern traditions and experiences. So, like a Chinatown immersion walk in San Francisco, or I joined the Fuller pilgrimage to Manzanar last year. And these experiences are putting me back in touch with Asian heritage and that part. And helped me change my language a little bit. I realize I code switch a lot, and I'm still navigating that, but I think I'm choosing to embrace my heritage and not give in to things that I just became accustomed to, like maybe participating in harmful stereotypes, even ingesting.
How does that story connect with the recent Biden administration's recognition of Japanese internment camp?
Yeah, so I think it was Clinton, but my father had passed, but my mom is still alive, and one of the presidents actually signed the redress acknowledgement. And so I think that was in the 90s, early 90s. So the survivors and their families did get an apology from the president and some redress money. And actually that helped me buying my first house. But it's helpful because, I posted that statement from the White House on Facebook on the 19th, because that's the anniversary of the signing of Executive Order 9066.
Yeah.
It's helpful to have it be remembered, because the Nisei that were in the camps, they're starting to die off, and their stories are going with them. And I'm really grateful that my mom interviewed her parents before they passed, because both of my parents were in the concentration camps, and my dad died without, we hardly know anything about his family history, and we're trying to put it together. But I have it from my mom now. But we have to speak it out, and it needs to be remembered by people in positions of power and who represent the country that actually incarcerated my ancestors. Yeah. So it's super important because otherwise we quickly forget. I was working with a consultant who does kind of racial reconciliation stuff. And she said that it takes a catalytic event for people to move to action and to move the needle. And she said, but they quickly forget. And so the needle kind of comes back. And unless another catalytic event happens where people remember that, like George Floyd's murder. So now it's 4 years later and people don't really talk about it anymore.
Right.
I talk about it all the time because I need the allyship of, all people of color and white people as well. But I also need people in positions of power who typically are seen as the people who can oppress or don't understand what it's like in position for people of color to really remember and speak out about that.
Well, when I come to Northern Cal in July, I'll bring all the collections I have. Altadena Presbyterian Church used to display all the internment camp stories, the people in booklet. I went into that kind of phase and started collecting all the stories, and they are so powerful. And it is grandchildren who come from school, and for school assignment, they're interviewing their grandparents, and that's how it began, unpacking hidden, buried stories. So, wow.
Yeah, that's how my mom got invited to speak. And she went to, I think my cousin's child was in college at the time, could be high school. And she flew down to SoCal to speak, to support his event. And at the end, and has also been able to provide some artifacts and stuff for the Japanese museum.
Yeah, before Diana asks another question, I think stories are so important because stories shape how we experience and see the world. And if our stories are not represented, and we are so invisible. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Amen.
Yeah, that's a word I hear and I feel a lot. And, Diana asked how it impacts my ministry. I mean, part of it is just me representing our Asian American and Asian population at our church. Because my church is still predominantly white, but my campus is probably 60 to 70% Asian and Asian American. And I've had volunteers tell me, like, Cris, it really matters. It's important that you're Asian in your, staff and representing leadership. And it really became important when, like, the AAPI violence and hate was escalating because I had congregants who were fearful and grieving, and it kind of took somebody, who's Asian American to even begin to understand and just listen empathically. So there's big things like that has impacted my ministry to support and pastor the people in my congregation. And there's little things like you said, sharing my story. So I often share with my leaders different parts of my journey. I wrote about my trip to Myanmar. I'll show people pictures and I talk about it because it's my experience, and then they can see where they interject into that story. And then it's even little things like having one of my volunteers tell me that she was describing an Asian person and described her cute and sweet. And I, so we continued the conversation, but I have a relationship with this person and trust. And so I was able to tell her, like, that could be perceived as a microaggression. And she told me, yeah, she didn't like it when I said that. So a lot of it is just creating awareness because, sometimes we as Asian Americans are the worst perpetrators the very things that bother us. So, so like the big things and the small things that have really helped.
Let me insert one more. Speaking of Manzanar, Isaac organized several events with, Bill Watanabe and Tommy Joe. In Little Tokyo, I didn't know how much memorabilia of internment experiences and Pearl Harbor. They are everywhere, and one of the area where Japanese American artists painted timeline of Japanese first arrival, and then she painted internment period, dark black. And it's right below chop suey restaurant that doesn't serve chop suey anymore. It's just sandwich and bread and butter. But when you come down, it's a must place to go.
I look forward to that.
Yes.
Y'all can take me there.
Thanks so much, Cris. Your testimony and what you shared so far is really powerful. And I agree that for my own sake, having more Asian American women modeling, pastoral positions is really important for our younger generation. So thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like, you're full-time adult discipleship director, you're going to Fuller Theological Seminary, getting your master's, and then you're also having that Asian American concentration. So I'd love to hear more about that. Sounds like, it goes along with your story of why you're interested in learning more about the Asian American ministry, but would love to hear what you're learning, what you are enjoying about that experience, and how you hope to apply that studying to your ministry too.
I'm really grateful to be at Fuller. This is not a paid advertisement, but
it sounds like it.
I promise, no one's paying me for this. But
I'll just send them a bill.
See, I'm taking notes from Young about fundraising. But I think that Fuller is a world-class seminary, and it's reflected in what I'm learning. And the funny thing is that I had people caution me about going to Fuller for various reasons, but one of the biggest reasons and things that I heard the most frequently was Fuller's like really rigorously academic, and they don't really teach you practical ministry application. And I found that latter part to not be true at all. Like almost every class, there's some reflection on how this relates to, ourselves, our own social location, and our ministry context. Keeping in mind that there's just a huge variety of people, like young 20s, just only having school experience primarily, to the oldest person that I've seen in a class was 85 years old.
Oh,
and she was in my missiology class. So yeah, there's so many things I'm learning in the Asian American context. I took 2 classes from Daniel Lee, and we framed a lot of it around his book that helps us understand our Asian American identity. And he uses this quadrilateral, and that has been just a super helpful tool for not only me shaping my identity and how that impacts my faith and ministry, but also to kind of explain to other people who are people of color and even white people who often say when you ask them about their culture, then they say, I don't have one.
They point out, yeah.
Yeah. Super interesting.
I'm excited to hear what I have dreamt as the first woman of color faculty in 1990s. So I have whole history of how many, people work so hard to see Fuller finally having Asian American Center. And I think I've contributed to that as well, because I had to speak out loud why there's Hispanic Center, African American Center, And when there are so many Asian American students who are paying tuitions, how come there's no Asian American Center? And I had to, underscore and stress and shout, hey, this is not right.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And Daniel Lee, who's the dean, is doing a lot of work right now and kind of building that out. So he showed me a diagram, and he's got kind of 4 primary areas. So Tim Tsang will head up the historical part. There's the mental health, pastoral, I'm forgetting an arm, but he's really building that up, and it's taken years. But I am so grateful to be the recipient of your hard work and all the people who joined you. I mean, I studied your book in, I think, more than one class.
Wow.
Who spoke?
You're.
By the way, I'm also, Tim Tsang is the one who invited all of us to launch Isaac in 2006. So I'm so glad they have a history person. But let me segue. We began talking with racial reckoning and API hate and Black people's trauma and ongoing violence. I sometimes feel that gender equality and equity issues that women experience have been leaped over. So I'm the one who is shouting out loud. Yes, sexuality issue then took front line. But somehow gender equality issue has been pushed to the back burner. And that's why PastoraLab was born. And Diana, if you can move on to that question, that would be great.
Yeah, that will be our last question. But yeah, Cris, you've been a participant in PastoraLab, and you're starting to get ready to facilitate a new one. So I'd love to hear maybe one thing you've learned and what you hope to see in the new cohort.
Yeah, so I truly believe that women of color in ministry leadership need each other for that exact reason that you just said, Young, because even in spaces where they are egalitarian, I think for Asian American women in particular, there's a history of patriarchy that is still pervasive, even in egalitarian circles. So I feel like we need each other to be emboldened as women, as Asian American women, and also to just be in a caring and safe community where people get you before you even have to say anything. Like you can just say one word and then, it's like, and let us pray for you. We need that desperately. And so as I think about this new cohort, I hope for that. I hope we build relationships of trust and safety with each other, that we learn from each other. And, I just, even before getting on this call, somebody I met from the national cohort that lives close by, and we get together, like we're friends now. And she asked me, how can I pray for you? So there's just so much beauty in that, this common bond that we have as Asian American women of faith in leadership, that we just really need each other. And I'm so grateful to be a part of my existing cohort and then to look ahead with hope for my new cohort.
We practice leadership reproduction. So it's a homegrown leadership, and just people, women who go through PastoraLab, then they can also multiply. And so that's an exciting moment for this endeavor. Women often do not have a tribe. I don't mean to be tribal, but not having that tribe who can cover your back and you can come and say, we have this entity where you cannot afford to mistreat us. There is going to be 10 or 70 women who is going to come alongside, and, we're going to weep together and rejoice together. And that tribe was missing in my life. You often feel parachuted, and you get tired of being the only of its kind in whatever meeting setting you are in. But now you have that space of belonging, and you also have not just a pouring out, but both receiving and giving, that reciprocal, because you are busy just pouring out and drain yourself. But I'm hoping that this space, new cohort, would be a space of an oasis, that you come as who you are and becoming together more fully who God created you, as an equal partner in ministry, both men and women. So,
Amen. Well, thank you, Cris, for being here. I'll wrap us up to say that thank you all for listening. You're listening to When Women Preach, and we just really appreciate your time. We have about 5,000 downloads to this podcast, so we'll love for you.
5,000.
Over 5,000. So if you really enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe. And we also will be on YouTube. We will have that link in our February newsletter, so please stay tuned. But look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
And I want to thank Louisville Institute and Lilly Endowment, who made this podcast possible. So if you can subscribe, we can amplify Asian American women and Latina women's voice. Thank you, Cris.
Thank you.